Well, I have a specific love. Today I'm going to show you how I turned a bunch of scrap wood into some awesome push sticks and push blocks for my table saw. Let's begin. In the past, while using my table saw, I primarily just used another piece of wood to help push everything past the blade. Well, that worked, but it was also very dangerous because there was a great chance of kickback and coming right back onto me or hitting stuff behind me or somebody else for that matter and just causing a lot of pain or just injury or damage. So, by making these tools, we're going to be a lot more safe. I first started out with some leftover pallet wood from a previous project. I took it to my joiner and squared off the edges and flattened most of the imperfections on the top and bottom. I then trimmed it down with the miter saw. I added some glue and clamped it down. I then decided to add a few more layers, making the total thickness 4 boards thick, but then bumped that to 8. While those were drying, I cut down some PVC pipe to make a handle. I then took it to the drill press to make some holes for screws. After the glue dried, I ran the boards over the joiner to flatten all of them out. This can be done on a belt sander as well, but it will take longer. I then secured the handle to the block with 4 screws. I then decided to make a second block using a 2x4, which worked well with 3 layers. But for this handle, I replaced one of the T-connectors with a 45-degree elbow. On the bottom of the blocks, I wanted to test 2 different surfaces. The first was a layer of hot glue, which was easy to apply and sticks to the wood very well. And the second surface was a drawer liner that I glued on the ends. For both blocks, I added some removable plywood to act as stoppers so both blocks wouldn't slide off the wood when being cut. Only time will tell which block will work better, but I'm leaning toward the hot glue version. Next up was an old piece of badly warped and twisted oak. So I ran it across my joiner until I removed over half of its thickness to flatten it out. I then cut it in half with a miter saw and glued and clamped them together. After it dried, I squared up the edges with the joiner and miter saw. I then drew out a shape and trimmed it down with the jigsaw. And then I sanded all of the rough edges near the handle. The ending result was a strong and sturdy push stick. And for the final piece, I wanted to build something that was functional and looked cool too. I had a bunch of strips of 1/4-inch plywood left over from my flag project that I did not want to trash. So I glued them together face to face so that the end grain would be showing on the sides. I then clamped and added weight on the sides to help prevent bowing. Now that all these pieces are nice and glued up, I'm ready to try and, well, shave it down a little bit to get nice and smooth. So I'm going to try and put it through my planer. It is definitely a lot of wood glue, and I've heard that's not necessarily great for your blades, but, you know, I don't have much other option unless I want to sand this for possibly hours. So we're going to give this a shot. I had a feeling there was a chance that this might happen. This is actually the plywood splitting on itself right here on the end. And that was my fault because I was feeding it in long ways, which makes it very weak. So now I'm going to try, even though it's a little more dangerous, I'm going to try and feed it in this way so that it will cut the side off without trying to break any more pieces off the ends. Now that right there will give you a rough idea about how much wood I had to remove total from both sides, so that it could be flat. I then took it over to the table saw to clean up the sides using the miter gauge. I then used the miter saw to trim off the top edge where the handle will go. And I returned to the table saw where I angled the miter gauge to remove the excess wood from the top edge. I then used a 4-string bit in my drill press to drill out several holes for the handle. I next used a small saw to trim out some of the excess and tried to smooth it down with a spindle sander. There were a few bumpy edges left over, but this ended up being extra grip for my fingers, so I left them. I then went over the corners with an orbital sander. On the bottom, I glued an extra piece of plywood to grip the wood when cutting. And the ending result not only looks great, but it is very useful when cutting. Now I know some of these products can be purchased in the store, but I think it's a lot more fun to build whatever you're going to use or make. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, click the like button. Tell us what you think about it in the comments, and as always, have fun building.